as far as the wrist and hand muscles are concerned, there's a lot. For the purpose of this class, I will only focus on the extrinsic muscles. So these are the muscles that originate somewhere along the elbow, the radius and the ulnar, and they cross the wrist joint. All right. Of course, with all this, there'll be muscles that only act on the wrist, and the code word for that, as we get into the nomenclature here, would be the word carpi. If you see the word carpi, you automatically know that this muscle only acts on the wrist. We'll often see the word flexor and extensor, right? So if you see the word flexor, you know that it's flexing about a particular joint site. So flexi carpi radialis, the name is telling you that this is a muscle that runs on the radial bone on the anterior side that flexes the wrist. Does that make sense? So the name is going to tell you, for the most part, what it does. So I will start here on the anterior muscles first. This next slide is incredibly important. I want you guys to make a start here. This will help you orient the musculature, if you will. All right. So all wrist flexors and the extrinsic muscles of the hand, they all have their origins on the anterior medial aspect of the proximal forearm. So again, if we're in anatomical position, it will be the anterior medial aspect of the forearm and the medial epicondyle. All right. So all of the muscles that flex the wrist and some of our fingers will all originate on some aspect around this area here. All right. Yeah, exactly. So this will be the anterior pictures here that we're seeing. We're only going to focus on the superficial layers here. All right. Again, we have our pronator teres. The pronator teres is not actually going to act on the wrist. This was a muscle we talked about in the elbow lecture here. But as far as all of the muscles that act on the wrist, that actually will originate in that specific location. And there's a location on the medial condyle of the elbow that's called the common flexor tendon. All right. So all the muscles that I'll be considering here, they all pretty much originate on that common flexor tendon. All right. So again, all the muscles that I want you all to consider is named here for you guys. All right. So moving on now to the posterior muscles. Again, to make a start on this slide. So all of our wrist extensors and some of the muscles that will extend our fingers will originate on the posterior lateral aspect of the forearm and the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. All right, so again, anatomical position will be right here. It's also important to note here, as far as the muscles that pronate and supinate as well, our supinator muscles are usually with our extensor muscles. So again, it'll be around this area. And our pronator muscles, our pronator teres, for example, will be associated with the muscles that flex the wrist. So again, it'll be located on this aspect. All right. Again, I'm just trying to organize these muscles in a way that you guys can digest the material more readily. All right. So same deal here as with our common flexor tendon. We also have our common extensor tendon on that other side too. So aside from our extensor carpi radialis longus, as well as our brachioradialis, all of the rest of our superficial muscles will originate on that common extensor tendon. All right. And also like a side note here, when I'm lecturing, I'm giving you guys like strategies to organize these muscles. I'm not going to come up here and like, name each muscle and stuff. That's why I have you guys, doing those quizzes and stuff, right? So for obviously, like, you guys are adults. Like, I'm sure a majority of students will just, go through it so they can say that they don't, it's whatever, But to further supplement your learning, I want you guys to kind of take this over and over and over again, or at least a couple times, so that way, while I'm lecturing, it's not that I'm breezing through this. I want you guys to make associations based off of those quizzes. Those are like easy 100 points, but it's not about the points. I want you guys to get it. So then when you refer back to the lecture, it's like, okay, that makes sense because I know this muscle originates here, or like I know this muscle located here. All right. So that's how I'm organizing this class, if you will. All right. Does all that make sense? Again, as far as like the nomenclature for the vast majority of this, if you see the word extensor carpi, it's extending about the wrist and is located somewhere around this region. All right. Same thing, if you see flexicarpi, is flexing the wrist, and the origin of those muscles is located right here. All right. That's like the bare bones hip pocket information, how I want you guys to organize it. All right. God bless you. All right, so epicondylitis is just the inflammation of either the medial and lateral epicondyles. Again, it can associate with those ligaments, the radial and ulnar collateral ligaments, but technically it's mostly associated with the tendons that will attach on this area. Again, we're talking about the common flexor tendon and the common extensor tendon. So whenever those regions gets inflamed, you'll have what you called epicondylitis. So depending on where they are, we have specific names for them. So if we have inflammation on this area here, we also call that golfer's elbow, right? Anybody here golf by chance, right? So when you golf and you're using your dominant hand, what action is inducing that extreme force that we see on the medial condyle? Is it concentric or eccentric? Eccentric, right? So I'm not gonna show you my golf swing because it sucks, but either way, while you're coming down, initially you have that fast velocity, right? In order to hit the ball. As soon as you hit the ball, you're now trying to slow your arm down, essentially, right? So it's that extreme eccentric action that occurs about the this joint site that may cause some issues. Same thing we see here on the lateral epicondyle. It's called tennis elbow, but it's really associated with like a backhand tennis form, right? Not with the forehand. If it's with the forehand, you can make an argument again that also may be medial epicondylitis. Again, I don't use these names, but this is used for you just to kind of orient yourself. All right. Intrinsic hand muscles. I won't get into the specifics here. I'm not going to test you on this, too much. The main thing I want to hammer in on is just specific nomenclature. If we refer to the hand image here, you'll see on the anterior side, we'll have what we call the thenar eminence and the hyperthenar eminence. When you see the word thenar eminence, these are mainly the muscles that act on the thumb. All right. The key word for this would be pollicis or pollucis, not pollucis, pollicis. So when you see thenar and then you see a muscle that has the word pollicis, you also know, okay, this is a muscle that is acting on the thumb. And then you have various muscles there, right? I mean, you'll have your abductor, let's see, might be on the next slide here. Yeah, abductor pollicis brevis, flexor pollicis brevis. Again, the nomenclature would tell you exactly what it's doing. But either way, when you see thenar, I want you to think, okay, this is the pollicis muscle that we're concerning here, and it's going to act on the thumb. When you see the word hyperthenar eminence, these are the muscles that would be acting on your pinky finger. All right. The word here to consider would be digiti minimi. All right. So when you see the word hyperthenar, it's like, okay, there has to be a muscle associated with the digiti minimi or digiti minimi, however you want to name it. Does that make sense? Also on the fingers, you'll have your various interocular muscles and lumbricals. We won't get into those specifics there. Just know that they exist, at least for the level of this course, but we won't get into the specifics there. Extrinsic muscles. When we have an extrinsic muscle that acts on a particular like finger, for example, also know that it crosses the wrist as well. So even though its primary function is to act about that particular finger, it will also provide some weak action about our wrist as well. All right. So after all the talking, these next couple slides is what I'll be testing you on essentially. This is how I want you to organize the information, right? So all the muscles that we talked about, there are 6 muscles that move the wrist only. Again, notice that you'll see the word carpi on most of them except your palmaris longus. This is the only unicorn in the group. Referring to our wrist flexors, again, you'll see the word flexor carpi, either radialis or ulnaris. And then again, we have our palmaris longus. And then as far as our wrist extensor action is concerned, we essentially have extensor carpi radialis muscle group and our extensor carpi ulnaris. For our wrist ulnar deviators, these will be the muscles that run on the ulnar side. If they run on the ulnar side, you know that they will attach somewhere around this region, right? On the ulnar side, ulnar deviation. So it'll be our flexor carpi ulnaris and our extensor carpi ulnaris. Same thing with our radial deviators. Muscles that deviate on, that allow us to do radial deviators will be the muscles that run on the radial bone. Also notice that we have our pollicis muscles here because that's where our thumb is located, all right? So the extrinsic thenar muscles will also contribute to radial deviation as well. All right, again, I have a huge list of extrinsic hand and wrist muscles. I'm not gonna test you guys too much on this. Just to point you guys on some nomenclature here. If you see the word indicis, that just means our pointer finger, excuse me. All right, everything else is pretty much straightforward. We have our flexor digitorum group, superficialis and profundus, flexor digitorum. These digitorum muscles are probably the largest extrinsic muscles that act on our fingers. The main difference, and you don't really need to know this now, but the main difference between the superficialis and the profundus is that the superficialis will insert, somewhere on the middle phalange. The profundus will insert all the way through. All right. On the extensor side, we only have one extensor digitorum, and that will insert all the way on the distal interphalangeal joint. Another important note as far as the digitorum muscles are concerned is that they only act on digits 2 through 5. They do not act on the thumb, right? We have our pollicis group for that. Does that make sense? A lot of information. I just, again, just make sure you orient yourself and kind of organize it accordingly. All right. Moving on to the last portion of the lecture here. Other structures here to note, we have our carpal tunnel. Again, this is the tunnel made from the muscle tendons, and is kind of roofed by the respective retinaculum. All right. So our carpal tunnel will be located on the anterior side. So our floor here will be our carpal bones. And then you have the tunnel. And then along with these tunnels, you have the specific muscle tendons, right? So if we're talking about the anterior side, these muscle tendons will be what? Will it be the flexor? Yeah, it'll be the flexor group that we're considering here. All right. So when we talk about carpal tunnel syndrome, it's essentially that narrowing of this tunnel space. All right. It could be induced by a lot of things, either inflammation about various muscle tendons, ligaments even, but the actual thing that we feel is the irritation about the median nerve. All right, and towards the end of the slide, I'll get more into nerve pathways here. All right, but when we talk about carpal tunnel syndrome, think irritation of the median nerve, and that's because it's passing within that carpal tunnel. Does that make sense? Another canal here to consider is the Guyon canal, and the main nerve that will be affected here will be the ulnar nerve. Again, the ulnar nerve is going to run on that ulnar side. And if you notice here, actually, the ulnar nerve is going to run over the flexor retinaculum. All right. So as far as the brachial plexus is concerned, the only nerve branches that run within that carpal tunnel will be that median nerve. All right. The ulnar and the superficial radial nerve will run over that flexor retinaculum. Okay. So that's why when we have, carpal tunnel syndrome, it's not really those nerves that is of concern, it's that median nerve. However, if you fracture the hamate bone, again, that's found on the pinky side, you may induce, some sort of pathological implications about the ulnar bone as well. It's also important to note the main bone that is like injured will be our scaphoid bone, right? It's the first bone we talked about. And does anybody know why that would be the case? Like if you injure your wrist in a traumatic event, what usually occurs? Yeah, so if I'm falling on an outstretched hand, right? You lose balance in the air, you're trying to catch yourself, right? If you fall on an outstretched hand, it usually implicates in that area. If anybody can do this, you can actually palpate your scaphoid bone. If you kind of move your thumb in a way that you can see the tendons of your various pollicis muscle. I don't know if you guys can see my hand, but this is actually called the anatomical snuff box. Does anybody know why it's called the anatomical snuff box? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, for non-anatomical, purposes, you guys want to sniff some sugar or whatever, that's where you'll put it. But yeah, so your scaphoid will be located. The scaphoid bone will be located right there. All right. So again, that's the bone that's usually implicated on a wrist injury that's caused by like the Fuchs mechanism. Fuchs means falls on an outstretched hand. All right. Got some other images there for you. think that's what I want to talk about. Let me see. Yeah, all right. So I briefly touched on this on the previous video about the elbow and the proximal forearm. I'm gonna give a more like brief, superficial overview of the brachial plexus. Again, once any of you guys that are interested in going into graduate school, you guys will get the full, like the full cake as far as the brachial plexus is concerned. My job is just to kind of get you prepared and kind of oriented for that, right? So as far as the brachial plexus is concerned, we have our various roots, trunks, etc. We're actually going to start off with the branches. We have 5 branches. Along with the ulnar, radial, and median, we have our axillary and we have our musculocutaneous. While we move down, as we move down the arm, the nerve that is most responsible for providing motor innervation to our main elbow flexors, that will be our musculocutaneous nerve. It's not associated here, but again, that's a tidbit of information. And that would be like our biceps brachii, all right? Again, and we're actually talking here on the anterior side. So musculocutaneous associated here, all right? On the posterior side, the main nerve that we're concerned with is the radial nerve. The radial nerve is, in my opinion, is probably the nerve that probably contributes the most as far as our arm muscles is concerned. So once we move down, the radial nerve is responsible for innervating the muscles on the posterior side of our upper arm, which is what's the main one that we're talking about? The posterior side, triceps, right? So that'll be our radial. The interesting thing about the radial nerve is once it hits that cubital fossa in the elbow, it kind of bifurcates. And it has many branches. So for the purpose of simplification, all those branches we'll consider as also being part of the radial nerve, right? So not only everything here, but essentially all of our muscles that extend our wrist and our hand, that'll be supplied by branches from the radial nerve. That's all I want you to know. So when you think about the posterior side, just think radial nerve, all right? So moving back to the anterior side, we have our musculocutaneous for our biceps brachii, also with our brachialis as well. But we do have some radial nerve contribution there as well. So on the anterior side, the main nerves that we're concerned is either the median or the ulnar nerves, all right? That's all I want you guys to consider. So once we move down here, we have our biceps. This will be the musculocutaneous nerve, and that's a branch of the brachial plexus. Again, you'll also have some radial nerve contribution on the brachialis muscle specifically, but as far as just think musculocutaneous. Once we come down here, it will be either the ulnar or the median nerve. That's all I want you to know. It's interesting, like once you get into these specific muscles, it's kind of hard to arrange, which one's which, but as far as like consolidating the information, that's essentially all I want you to know. This picture here is a little different. This is the sensory innervation. So I don't want you guys to get confused that this is showing the motor activation. This is the sensory stuff. So each of the brachial plexus, they also give off, cutaneous branches as well. When you hear the word cutaneous, those are afferent nerves. All right, so afferent nerves is sensory nerves. It brings the information from the environment, back to the brain. So it's not really providing that motor sensation. All right. hang in with me, guys. All right. I'm not going to get into the vasculature here. Just know that the main picture, you have your ulnar nerve and radial nerve running on each of the respective sides. Once it gets into the hand, you'll see these various arches, and you'll see this both on the posterior and the anterior side of the hand. So just know that the radial and ulnar artery runs, and it joins together at the palm, and then they give off the various branches. All right, we're not going to get too specific here. Also on the vein, I kind of touched on this again last week in the video. We have our two main veins, right? So we have our basilic and our cephalic. Our basilic is on our ulnar side, and our cephalic runs more so laterally on our radial side. But again, just know that pretty much once it reaches a hand, it joins together, and there's these various networks. That's it. All right. Okay. I also included these various charts for you guys. This is for just supplemental material for you guys to review and complete those quizzes. If you guys are as ambitious and inclined, you guys are more than welcome to memorize these charts word for word. All right, that is it. Let me stop my recording.